Mike Golic Jr., Jason Fitz, Spencer Hall joining us. It's Throwback Thursday. Usually Mike and I get relegated to Monday nights to talk about Monday Night Football, but today we get to talk a little college football from the wheelhouse that he and I love so much. We are joined by Spencer. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Tonight is the Miracle at Michigan. That's the game that we're looking back on as it's another heartbreaking loss for the Wolverines. This game was from back in 1994. Mike, how old were you when this game happened?
I was the ripe old age of 5 when this game was going on right now, and still felt the joy of Michigan's world burning deep within my soul at that point already.
Even as a young child. Okay, so that's fair. I just had to get that out of the way. Obviously, Mike, you and I weren't covering any of this at this stage, but it's fun to go back and watch and see a miracle ending. Spencer, when you look back at this era of football, particularly, Colorado was really good. What the hell happened?
Well, I mean, you remember they split a national title with Georgia Tech in 1991, I believe. And they get half a piece. They maintain a brilliant option offense. If you've watched, like, Darian Hagan is the master of the late pitch. He was one of their quarterbacks. They were organized. They were tough. They gave the best teams of their time a contest every time they played. Ask Nebraska. Nebraska had some very tough games with them when Nebraska was maybe the best dynasty in the history of the sport at that point. And the reason they were so good is because they had a coach, Bill McCartney, who was able to realize that you're never going to get talent in state, right? Colorado has this many people, and you need this many to compete in college football. So they recruited LA really well. They recruited the West Coast really well. And they used a couple of recruiting techniques and ways to get people into school that you weren't really able to do after, say, I think 1997. So recruiting, organization, an option offense, and excellent coaching and exceptional ability to scout talent. That's how Colorado was good in the 90s.
Yeah, I think that portion of it, like national recruiting before that was necessarily like the go-to buzzword on everybody's lips in a lot of this. And quite frankly, maybe you look back and owe a lot more of the way people started to look at that situation, because what they ended up amassing talent-wise on this roster, I think when you look at the 94 team alone, of the 85 scholarship players on that team, 29 cashed a regular season NFL paycheck. And I think 26 or 27 were draft picks. Now, the draft was much bigger. There were more rounds back then. But even if you look by that, like, staggering numbers from this one roster alone. And so much of that is owed to the fact that you did go far and wide and kind of recruit places that generally people weren't doing in that way.
And also in things that are old and are new again, the revolution in quarterbacks being mobile and running and throwing. Colorado, though not exactly revolutionary on offense, the things that they allowed Cordell Stewart to do in that offense were ahead of their time, right? He had a lot of liberty and a lot of freedom to improvise and make plays.
Stick there for a second, Spencer, because I thought that was interesting watching the game back. I don't know that we necessarily give Cordell Stewart the amount of love that he should get for who he was as a college quarterback.
No, I don't think so. I think he was a much better college quarterback. This game, by the way, is not evidence of that. He is very productive. He is good in spots. When you watch this game, 4 turnovers. There will be 4 turnovers that Colorado commits in this game. He's responsible for a couple of those. He's not good, but when you have a player of that caliber and you have a player of that talent and potential, they can do things like come back from a 26-14 deficit in the late third quarter.
Well, and you're right.
Taking an offense that leans into the strengths like that, like you allow them to do that. You mentioned overall for Colorado in that era, a very productive option offense. When you've got Rashawn Salam in the backfield to go along with that, like why not make your strength the true strength and really lean into all those things? So it makes a lot of logical sense, which is something that college football doesn't always do.
Yeah, not necessarily, but in college football you can't do this. Y'all get out of the way, right? That's. Sometimes, if you got to get your guy, which is one of my favorite terms, you need a touchdown, he'll get you one. And ultimately, despite all of his mistakes in this game, Cordell Stewart gets them in a position to win at the end.
Well, and I guess to that end, and you mentioned Rashawn Salam, that's another example. When I watch back to this era of college football, I'm reminded that it feels like sometimes we take whatever their NFL career was and we sort of squish it on top of what they were as college football players. And there's got to be some way to hold those mindsets completely separate, because as we get further away from these eras, it's I think easier to go back and look at it and say, hey, we should be appreciating this a little bit more. And then you see some of that, and everybody will see the dramatic ending of this game. Now, the dramatic ending does take us to the other side of this. Yet again, it feels like this is just part of Michigan's history. Mike laughs at it as the former Irish guy with us, right? But it's just Michigan just can't win the Big Ten. There we go. Like in this moment, you just feel like another heartbreak for Michigan. I can't figure out where the disconnect is for them as a program, but my heart sort of broke for them in that moment.
Yeah, I don't think you can see Michigan here as anything but similar to Colorado in a lot of ways. Michigan had a way that things worked for a very long time. They exploited certain regional resources and talent that always came in the same form. I swear, if you watch Michigan up until the end of the Lloyd Carr era, every team kind of looks the same. They have a gigantic offensive line, just like built on pizza and powerful run blocking. They run the same plays. Like in this game, you'll see, like they run a boot with the quarterback, and they ran that same play for like 15, 20 years straight, and no one ever defended it. They always had active running backs, and they were always happy to just lean back and play defense and let the defensive line and linebackers eat you up. It was a very like classic, like if you look at this Michigan team, it's not only a classic Michigan team, but it's a classic Big Ten team of the era in terms of the way they do things, the way they look, and where they put talent. Also, the immortal Tishimanga Biakapatuka, who you may remember from the Carolina Panthers. I nailed that, y'all. Biakapatuka was an astonishingly talented running back, both at Michigan and later in the NFL.
You were, by the way, the only one even remotely capable of pulling off that name on this call. So thank you for taking that so that none of the rest of us have to try and butcher our way through that. But yeah, I think Spencer hit on there like one of my favorite things about college football in general, which is the way the regions tend to bunch around certain ideals. And it's what in this era of college football, you could succeed on the highest level doing it that way, leaning into the identity that was going to win you your conference and get you out of there. And a lot of that was also structured around the way just the entire reward system for college football was at that point. It wasn't, even now when we move to the BCS ideal, what we were dealing with now in the college football playoff, what you see now, and it becomes so much more obvious, is you still have teams like, let's stick with the Big Ten, like Michigan State, for as long as I played or watched them, ran the same level of plays. You were going to get that offense. A running back was going to come out of nowhere and blow your mind, and they were going to run a bunch of pin and pull plays, have two gigantic offensive tackles, and away we go. Wisconsin, I mean, every year it's the same formula with them. But it's the teams that transcend that recruit nationally in a way the others don't. Read Ohio State, read basically anywhere Urban Meyer has plopped himself down along the way, and you can always pick them out of the pile. And so that's been the interesting part, is watching what a great college football team almost has to look like now in order to compete the way the game's structured.
Is that a good thing? I mean, Spencer, when you look back at that era versus now?
I think it was it was fun in a way, because I think that with college football, and one of the things that makes it very different than the NFL, you could sort of say, well, here is this species, and this is the way they do things. And then here's this other interesting universe, and that's the way they do things. And I think that is interesting. I think that, the Big Ten, I think in the 2000s, people made fun of the Big Ten for being lumbering, for falling behind the times. But keep in mind, they did that because it worked for so long, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And for a long time, that worked really, really well. So I think it was a bad thing in terms of what it would be in the 2000s. In the 90s, it was extremely entertaining, especially when you had massive mismatches in style. I, as a Florida fan, I'm thinking of the 1995 national championship game that ended with the Gators losing 62-24 to a Nebraska team playing the option, which they'd never seen. It was kind of like walking into a club and hearing a form of music that was played only in that city and having your mind blown. That's what Florida looked like, playing an option that ran like that and ran as well. And that's what they looked like with tiny, fast defensive linemen at the time facing big, corn-fed offensive linemen. It was an astonishing mismatch from start to finish. I mean, even I had to go, oh, man, that's something right there, as your team was completely destroyed. So I think the regionality was interesting. I think that the only bad thing I can think of is that you have teams that whose models don't work anymore, who are real cool. Like Colorado's had some years in between then. They were good for a couple of years, from like 2015 to 2018. But I miss the Buffaloes. Folsom Field's awesome. I'm going real long on this, but I just really wanted to get to I like Buffaloes, and I like seeing one run out on the field.
Okay, so that's where I'm really glad we got in all this, Spencer, because I have one point of connection, and then I have an iconic picture that I know you have referenced. When I heard Nebraska and Colorado, my eyes lit up because you know where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. It is one of the most staggering images ever in college football. But I'll never forget. My dad was a captain at Notre Dame in 1985, and they went out and played Colorado out at their place. And going down on the field before the game, he was one of the captains in the group that was coming out there at a time when Ralphie was getting ready to make his appearance. And my dad said, I will never forget the genuine fear that I felt as that buffalo ran past me, because you very quickly realized that the four escorts going along with him, those human beings, held no power in the situation. There was nothing separating that animal, if it decided, from going and ending your life and anyone else's life around it. He said it was, outside of maybe seeing Mike the Tiger in the cage in front of Tiger Stadium, the most impressive and terrifying thing he had ever seen.
That means a lot because your father played in Philadelphia.
Yes. Believe me, that is not lost on me. The horrors that man has witnessed, every once in a while during the show, I'll catch him staring off into the distance, sort of absent-minded, and I think that's why.
That's remarkable. Hey, guys, is there a way in your minds that Colorado can again become a consistently competitive team at the highest level, like a top 15 team in college football?
I'm going to say no. And that's me being a consistently top 15. I would say no because the population simply isn't there. Like the biggest correlation, if you're talking about how to get talent from one point to another, the biggest correlation in terms of commitment and recruiting, how close are you to home? 2 hours. Are you within 2 hours of home? If you're within 2 hours of your home, that is the strongest indication of where you're going to go. How many talented athletes are within 2 hours of Boulder, Colorado? Not many. There's more buffalo and more elk within 2 hours of Boulder, Colorado than there are five-star recruits, right? The counter argument for this is Alabama. Okay, sure. What's within Alabama? It's not like Tuscaloosa is near a major metropolis. It's not like Birmingham, Alabama is New York City. True, but Alabama disproportionately produces more five-star and four-star talent than a state its size should because of the intense focus on football at the high school level. And they have a machine that is determined to make them great. So I will say no, with the proviso that if you don't have a godfather figure who's going to drop serious cash and turn them into the next Oregon, no.
And I think part of that's also conference link, because we've seen even in certain of like the demise of the Pac-12 overall is sort of the opposite of the rising tide lifts all ships idea. And you saw this play out, like for me very personally, the kind of apt comparison is what happened with UConn's program. Now, in a lot of ways, there were other things that haunted it, but the dissolving of the old Big East and the connections that it used to have in the college football world, the clout that gave you going into recruiting rooms, being able to use to your advantage. Now, in a much more stark way, what they've been relegated to in the group of five, certainly as Spencer pointed out, regionally, the way the well has to some extent dried up a lot more than it used to in the Northeast in general and the footprint up here when it comes to recruiting. And then, you're not able to recruit nationally in the way that UConn had going down into the state of Florida, getting tertiary recruits there. So all that's to say the conference's overall weakness, I think, really depresses what a team that's already going to struggle with resources, like Spencer said, is capable of.
I have a question for you, Mike. If they stayed in the Big 12, do you think that they would have more potential to stay in the top 15 nationally?
I think so, just by way of, again, already the established foothold they had in there. And certainly I think the way the rest of the Big 12 has gone right now, just the way it shook out. Texas, obviously, in a lot of ways nationally has buoyed them. And then Oklahoma came along. And now you've got these two dueling brand names and a sort of gap waiting there. So I think they'd have a lot better shot, maybe just for the reasons of there's kind of a – where the Pac-12 is much more everyone closer to the mean cannibalizing each other, the Big 12 is sort of this gulf between one and perceived two and trying to figure out where someone's going to fill the void.
So to recap here, Mike Golic Jr. has used the word tertiary, which I still have no idea what it means. Spencer always told us that they need to start actually recruiting Buffalo to play in Colorado, which I'm here for in the world of recruiting. Why not get a little edgy, try something new? We've reminded Colorado fans are going to watch this game tonight that this was a great moment, but they're never going to be successful again. And Michigan fans that watch the game get reminded of one of the most heartbreaking losses at all. I feel like we've really done justice to what it takes to get people pumped up for a broadcast, gentlemen. This is some of our finest work at this point. Spencer Hall, Mike Golic Jr., I'm Jason Fitz. Enjoy the game. We'll go with that. Thanks, gentlemen.